good for us to know.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name's Christina and I'm the events coordinator here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out some logistics for how tonight's going to go. First off, we ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at this event. We'll be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end, so start thinking of questions to ask now. And after the talk tonight, Cheryl will be signing and personalizing books at the desk near where you checked in. We'll also have additional books available to purchase from my colleague at the register. If you're joining us virtually on the live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Time's Undoing online using the link in the live stream description. It's my pleasure to introduce you all tonight to Time's Undoing, a searing and tender novel about a young black journalist's search for answers in the unsolved murder of her great-grandfather in segregated Birmingham, Alabama decades ago, inspired by the author's own family history. Time's Undoing is both a passionate tale of one woman's quest for the truth behind the racially motivated trauma that has haunted her family for generations, and, as newfound friends and supporters in Birmingham rally around, the uplifting story of a community coming together to fight for change. Cheryl A. Head is a writer, television producer, and broadcast executive. She's also the author of the award-winning Charlie Mack Motown series, whose female PI protagonist is queer and black. Head is an Anthony Award nominee, a 2-time Lambda Literary Award finalist, a 3-time Next Generation Indie Book Award finalist, and winner of the Golden Crown Literary Society's Anne Bannon Popular Choice Award. She'll be joined in conversation today by Janet R. Jakobsen, who's a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies and co-director of the Center for Research on Women at Barnard College, Columbia University, as well as previous positions at Harvard. Professor Jakobsen's most recent book is The Sex Obsession: Perversity and Possibility in American Politics, a 2021 finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. Before entering the Academy, she was a policy analyst and organizer in Washington, D.C. Let's all give a very warm welcome to Cheryl and Janet.
Yeah. Hi. It's very fancy.
Yeah, that was fancy. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, so I'm Janet. This is
I'm
Cheryl. Yes. And Cheryl's going to read for us, and then we will have some conversation, and then we'll have a conversation with all of you. So thank you for coming, and we look forward to talking.
And let me get to my section that I'm reading, that I'm going to have ready. And this is, I'm holding a mic and reading, which is hard to do, but we're going to figure it out. Sorry for the delay here. I picked a new section to read for you tonight because I think it sets up the contemporary protagonist Megan's kind of character and her quest in this book. I'm reading from chapter 4, set in 2019, and I think it needs no further introduction. A few other reporters are scattered throughout the bullpen, but the newsroom is quiet. I like it this way, so I can order my thoughts. A lot of us work from home now, but today I'm giving a briefing on the Black Lives Matter protests. I've been with the Detroit Free Press 3 years, covering the BLM movement since the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson. I've built up a solid network of sources, which gives me both street cred with protesters and beat reporter chops at my job. The editorial meeting is in an hour, but first I need to call Grandma, who lives in Florida. After a squeal of excitement and a quick hello, she dives right into our competitive political banter. Grandma has a voice and opinions. She likes using both to keep her mind sharp. You still writing about them riots? It's her opening gambit. They're protests, Grandma, I shake my head, a symbolic gesture since she can't see me. Grandma owns a cell phone but has no internet or laptop. She watches no TV and listens to a single Christian radio station. My pastor says folks were looting and burning buildings. That's wrong. The people looting are not protesters. They're legitimate social justice demonstrations, I say. There is silence on the other end of the line. My mother's mother, Willie Mae Harrington McGarrah, has been black in America a long time. She's 92 and wields the number like a waving flag on the crest of a conquered hill. She's had the N-word flung at her as a child and adult, lived through the Depression, moved from the South to find the promised opportunities of the North, and married a soldier returning from World War II. Together, they raised children with tough love. Grandma voted for Dwight Eisenhower, then shifted her political allegiances to John F. Kennedy. She wept over the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. and cried for joy at the election of Barack Obama. My grandmother holds fast to the beliefs of her Southern upbringing, which include a literal interpretation of the Bible and the power of redemption. How are you feeling today? I finally ask. I'm 92 years old, and so are all my organs. I don't go much on feelings. I called for a reason, Grandma. I was at a funeral last week, and it made me think about what happened to your father. The story of my great-grandfather's death at the hands of police in 1929 fades in the telling with each passing year. Part fleeting history, part body memory, part family myth. It's a smattering of details carrying equal authenticity and dread. A master carpenter, Robert Lee Harrington's skills garnered him a salary beyond a laborer's wage. Family lore has it he bought a new car every year and dressed like a dandy. In the only photograph Grandma has of her father taken on his wedding day, his dark skin is radiant in a flashy suit and a cap, his expression one of pride and accomplishment. Great-grandmother sits by his side wearing a lacy flourish of a dress with white stockings and slippers. She's a 17-year-old girl who could pass for white. 2 years later in Birmingham, Alabama, great-grandpa was murdered by police. Maybe because of his wife's complexion, maybe his pride, or maybe it was something else. You had to go to a funeral? Grandma asks. The police killed another unarmed black man last week. Oh, Megan, she gives a quick inhale. I feel so sorry for him and his family. I do too, Grandma, but what about our family? I say quietly. We don't even know where great-granddad is buried. All we have is his wedding photo and your snatches of memory. It's as if he never lived. I listen to her labored breathing and wait for her response. When it comes, her voice is hoarse with sadness. They say he was a man too boastful for his own good, never shied away from a slight, but he didn't deserve to die before he really had a chance to live. I'm planning to write great-grandpa's story and about the trauma police have caused black families in America for more than a century. After all these years, Grandma says, you'd think things would change, but I guess they haven't.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you, Cheryl, for writing this book. That's an amazing, I was like, how are you going to pick something to read? And for those of you who don't, know the book, there are two voices in the book. One, the voice that we just heard, which is Megan McKenzie, the journalist, who is, we have to admit, younger than you and I.
Uh-huh.
And two, the voice of Robert Lee Harrington. As the promotional material also says, it's also your family story. So first, just in saying thank you, I just want to say that this book, this story is important. I think that the section shows it. It speaks to these crucial issues about violence, policing, racism in the United States. It's also a joyful book. It's a funny book. You saw some of the humor just in that moment. And it's a healing book. So first of all, thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was a pretty sweet analysis.
And I'm a scholar, so everything I say is absolutely true, and so that's an objectively true fact. But I did want to talk to you about the voices of the book, the decision to write in both Robert Lee's voice and Megan's voice, and write your story as a novel. It says so right here in the front. Again,
Yes.
must be true. Maybe you can then, also fold in how you decided to go ahead and write this book, because
Right.
we're glad you did.
Thank you. Well, I'll start with the end of that question. I've been walking around with the story in kind of my bones for decades, My mother and I had talked about one of us writing the story. I felt daunted by the fact that we didn't have a lot of details, a lot of facts, and I just thought I couldn't do justice to this story, even though it was, I think, personal and hurtful and important in the context of things now. But in March of 2020, when George Floyd was killed, I remember walking around the house kind of yelling out loud. And my partner was looking at me with pace back and forth. And I knew that day that I needed to write this story. And so the next day I started writing the story. Still, daunted by the fact that I didn't have a lot to grasp onto, understanding it couldn't be memoir because of that. So I started I think I started the 1929 chapters. I do remember just kind of organically laying something on the paper. And then I thought, to really make this a novel that has some resonance with younger readers, because I think it's important that young readers also come to this story and understand it for what it gives to the context of Black Lives Matter. I thought I'd better have a contemporary, younger protagonist who's kind of on a quest to suss out the clues, like I am. So I kind of began this journey where sometimes I felt like I was in parallel with Megan. We were kind of doing the same things at the same time. And I wanted her voice to be one with agency, one with the passion and energy of young people who were involved in these protests. I wanted to kind of make her a bit of a nerd, because I thought, who else but a nerd is going to try to figure out a 90-year-old crime?
And nerds love you for
We
it.
love nerds.
Yes, that's right. Those of us who are nerds are also, we love the exciting nerdy character.
Right. And so that's how the two voices came about, and kind of the two timelines came about.
No, that's really beautiful. And one of the things, speaking for nerds everywhere, that I love about it is that it's, as you know, Cheryl's a mystery writer, and of these Charlie Mack mysteries, which are they're Motown mysteries. You get the energy of what the series is like. I'm a mystery reader, so I've read these books. And this feels very much like a mystery story. Because it is, right? History is hidden from us. That's one of the things we've learned. That's how racism works in the United States. History is hidden from us. And it also has that, propulsive momentum of a mystery story. And then for those of us who are nerds and like to do research, it's like, research is exciting. So, that's...
I don't know if everyone feels that way.
But some of us do. But, one of the things I was interested in is in thinking about the different voices of your books, and thinking about one of the things that the book does amazingly is evoke Black communities. It evokes a Black community in Birmingham that is very welcoming and then actively supportive. They also have agency in the story, and they have agency in relation to supporting Megan. And then her home community in Detroit. And I then was imagining Charlie Mack, the detective in the Motown series, as also part of this broader community. So how do you think about these characters now that you've created, and I could also, by the way, see another Megan series, journalists to the rescue. So how do you think about the relation between Charlie Mack and Megan? I thought they were cousins myself.
They could be cousins.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it until you showed me that question. They are both from Detroit, and but a lot of times Black people have what we call play cousins. These are people we know in our communities and that kind of thing. I think they have some similarities. They're both, I will always write strong Black female protagonists. I think I will always write that. I think it's important to show Black women as agency, because my conceit, and some of you have heard me say this before, when I write Charlie, I think Black women are natural born detectives.
Right.
Think about the Black women in your lives. They know stuff. They can tell you things that you didn't see. They're observant.
Yeah.
They have a certain amount of ability to persuade. They can be very sweet, but you can be afraid of older Black women, because they'll give you that eye. So, but Megan is younger, but she comes from that community.
Yeah.
She's cut from that cloth. She has a lot of privilege. She comes from a family of two professionals. She's going to Stanford. This is the nerd part. She's going to Stanford. She was on the swim team and stuff like that. So she's not a typical Black young woman that you hear about. She's very, very proud of her occupation as a journalist. And I wanted her to have that kind of agency and that kind of earnestness and stick-to-itiveness to hunt down the story. That's what I would say about her.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you talk about, this is not something that you and I talked about previously, but her grandmother, and you could hear it even in the part that Cheryl read, also has agency. She's not in the story a lot because she's 92 years old and her organs are too. But nonetheless, you do feel that strength of agency and Megan's desire intergenerationally to do something on behalf of her grandmother
Right.
and in fact the whole community. Then that's part of what it means for the Birmingham community. So she leaves as a young child after her father is killed, Megan's grandmother, but you can still feel that the Birmingham community cares about this person who was just a little girl when she left.
I mean, it's a whole posse of older black people in this book who comes to her aid, and she is able to, reach across the generations and have a relationship with these folks. I think they see that she's serious about the story. They think it's an important story to tell. There's a line in the book where one of the older black ladies says, that's not who Birmingham is now, and I'm not gonna let this stand. We're gonna help you to tell this story. I wanted to build community. I wanted to show the importance of community, the power of community to make changes, even against really hard obstacles and impenetrable problems. That community folks getting together, like-minded, can really make a change. And I also wanted to show black life and black joy and black love, because I think those are the traits that have really helped black folks in America survive.
Yeah, and this is jumping ahead a little on our questions, but one of the things that I think is profound about the book is the obstacles that you just mentioned, which is to say that it shows the obstacles in hidden history, the ways in which, the covering over of what happened to Robert Lee Harrington is, part of the ongoing effect of racism, and it connects that then to what's happening today in police departments all around the United States, and the persistence of white supremacy, including, active white supremacist cells. Because I'm a nerd, I read all these reports, including there was one in 2019 out of the Brennan Center for Justice here about just all over the country the fact that there's active white supremacy within police departments, not just that they are racist in the way our society is, but active white supremacy. And you're able to bring that in. What led you to add that part of the book, and how did that work for you?
Well, my last Charlie book, book 6, really looked at the nascent beginnings of hate groups in Michigan. That series is set in Detroit. Again, compelled by current events. When I heard about this conspiracy to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan, I was thinking, who are these people? Where do they come from? What's wrong with them? That kind of thing. So I wrote that book kind of with the conceit of understanding who those folks were. In my research, I spent time in the chat rooms. They don't hide their chat rooms. You can just go in there and just see this vitriol. I mean, it's scary and demoralizing, but I wanted it to have that voice. And the other thing is, I think we just have to be vigilant, and that's why we have to just know all the stories and keep our eyes on the horizon. We can't ban books, so we don't repeat the things that have happened before. We have to be vigilant.
Yeah, and maybe we can come back at the end to the wonder of being here in this bookstore.
Yeah,
So
and so I sort of imagined that the threat to Megan in a modern day Birmingham would be the people who really want to keep those stories at bay, who want to hide their connection to that legacy. And I know Birmingham wants to reframe itself and reimagine itself, and I think it's a wonderful city. I've been there several times. They have some really good people there, but I also think places hold in their dirt. There's a line in the book that the earth has all the dirt. I think you don't get rid of a legacy of hundreds of years of racial injustice in over a few decades, or 6 decades, or 99 decades. It takes some time.
yeah. Well, and I think that, again, one of the things the book does so well, and, I plan to reread this book many times, but, is help us to inhabit, Megan is living, as she's chasing down this story, is living in history. And when you talk about, the community of people that come around to help her, one of them is the spirit of Robert Lee. And, so that felt to me, I study religion, by the way, I should, so any of these spiritual things are very important in my thinking. But I was very interested in the sense in which you were showing us, literally through the action of the book, the ways in which we inhabit histories that we may not know, and that they also come to us in ways both supportive in, the spirit of Robert Lee, and in ways that repeat the violences that these histories enact, and that are, held in the dirt, as you say.
Yeah, I opened the book because I wanted to read this one epigraph by Professor Christy Dotson of University of Michigan. She says, "Our memory is longer than our lifespan." And I do think we hold these stories in our bones, and especially when they're untold.
Yeah.
When they see some light of day, I think we can release some of the pain and some of the bad deeds that we've done over time in this country. But I think it's really important for us to remember those things, and if we can, to tell the story of these atrocities.
Yeah.
In some cases.
And so, can you say anything more about the spiritual part?
Yeah, that kind of surprised me. Okay, I think I put that in there because I actually do think my grandfather pointed to me sometimes. So I'm going through newspapers, reams and reams of black newspapers that are digitized. There in Birmingham, there were only a couple of them. I looked through the mainstream newspapers. I had hundreds of hours of time spent looking at newspapers. There must be, I put in Robert Harrington as a keyword, and like 7,500 pages popped up. So I would write, and then I'd take a few hours every day and go through the newspapers. And then one day, I'm sitting there at the dining room table, and one of the entries points me to page 17 or something like that in the St. Petersburg Times, June 29, 1929 edition. And there's a 1-inch by 1-inch article whose headline says, "Local Negro Killed by Birmingham Police." And the first line says, "Robert Harrington," then gives his address, "was killed by Birmingham Police on Saturday." And I thought, my God, I found it. And I thought that was a miracle. I really did. One thing, why would the St. Petersburg Times, a mainstream paper, have a report of a black man who's not important? He's a carpenter. So there were several times that happened to me, and I thought, I need to put some of this in the book, because apparently Grandpa's got some say in how this goes. So I did.
I like that idea that the spirit world has agency as well. So how are we doing on time? We still have 15 minutes? Okay, excellent. So, in this community of people who are supportive, in addition to the spirit of Robert Lee, you write a white character, and I think it's a very generous portrait to the point of being romanticized. I, of course, identify with her because, of course, she's trying her best to live out racial justice, and she comes from a conservative family, as do I. And she has to deal, and I think the ways that you show her efforts to deal with what it means when the histories collide, when the contemporary moment and the histories collide, and she has to come to terms with, it's not just that this is who her family was, it is who her family is, and distinguish herself. And I guess for me, I was just like, this is such a model that is not organized around white fragility or white resistance and those kinds of things. And again, I thought it was very generous of you to include that in the book, but were you at all hoping that people could read this? And the phrase that comes to mind is "chill the fuck out," which is, could they be able to read this character and find some way of responding that's not defensive?
Yes. I mean, I think it's really important in any of our struggles that we have allies, and particularly allies who, like Kristen does more than just talk the talk. She really gives up a lot. I really kind of feel bad that I left her in a lurch in this book, but she is a woman with strong convictions, and I wanted to show the power of real, genuine allyship. My brother-in-law, a white guy, said to me, "Are there any good white people in this book?" and I said, there are a few, but this is driven by a black narrative. I was thinking about it several times about, what Toni Morrison says about not paying attention to the white gaze.
Yeah.
That's not totally the focus of this book, because I think it's important that all kinds of readers read this story and take away from it, I hope, this sense that we are going through a period of time that is not necessarily brand new, that we do have to pay attention to our history. Do we have to remember things so that we don't repeat history? That we can, through community and goodwill and good people, move forward in a way that takes care of some of the divisiveness in this country and the vitriol in this country. Maybe I'm a little bit too optimistic about it. I want to be, though. I want to be. I think
yeah.
if you start talking about something and have an honest conversation, even when it's really hard and when you have to sit in your discomfort, you come out on the other end with insights that you haven't had before.
Yeah. And I actually didn't feel that the character Kristen was left in the lurch. I thought it was much more that process that you just talked about, where she comes out on the other side and is part now of this broader, loving community that is organized not around the white gaze, but as you said, around Black joy. And the book, one of the things that is that surprised me, is that it is, the detective story didn't, because I am a Charlie Mack reader, and the, seriousness of it didn't, because obviously the topic is so serious. But there is a lot of fun in the book. There's a little romance, there's some sex. There's a lot of food. Like, there's just like description after description of food, and it's just, by the end, you want to eat all this food too. I just, so, say more both about, I'm sort of interested in both your decision to include all this joy and community building and food, around food, and the like, and also, what's it like to write food like that? Like, do you make carrot cake and then write about it? Like, how's that working?
Well, I hadn't thought about that. No, the food thing, even in the Charlie Mack books, I've got a lot of food. People say to me, there's a terrorist coming, you stop and get Chinese takeout.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because you
Yeah.
gotta eat.
Yeah.
I think also food brings us together. It's it's a common denominator. Birmingham has this meat and three kind of thing. So you get your choice of meats, and they're always fabulous. Vegetarians, I'm sorry, and you get then three choices of side dishes, and there's all these restaurants in Birmingham that have the meat and three, and then they compete with each other, and you stand. It's like a cafeteria line. It's a really good food. I must admit. I also wanted to give Megan, something away from the grueling investigation and the seriousness of that. I wanted to give another little slice of her life, and she is a good cook, and she finds that relaxing, and so she's whipping up dishes, and she's staying in Birmingham a couple of weeks and thinks it's too expensive to just eat out all the time. So, and she likes to cook for her friends, and I guess that's part of me and her. I do like to cook for my friends.
Well, and so you have these two avatars now, Charlie Mack and Megan, and I look forward, as I said, to the Megan series. So, how do you live with them? In other words, are they your cousins? Are they your friends? Are they you?
Yeah.
Some of the above?
Yeah.
Like, how do you live with writing them? Because this character feels very powerful and, like I said, related to but different than Charlie Mack, and I could see it going on. Like, do you have hopes for your characters? Do you see them going on? I once talked to a writer who actually wrote stories beyond the story because she couldn't end it to know. So you do that, you write?
Yeah. I mean, for Charlie Mack, I have really extensive bios on all the characters.
Wow.
For Megan, not so much. Megan was a surprise to me. I think Charlie's more like me than Megan is. And so I'm not 28, so I do, I have beta readers and friends that's going like, do young people say this? Is hanging out, what does hanging out really mean? That kind of thing. So you'll see that in the book. She is, I think she, though, is an amalgam of the courageous people I see on the front lines. I wanted to give her some of those qualities. When a writer is very, very lucky, characters will speak to them. I've had that happen to me a couple times. It doesn't happen enough for me. I would love that. Megan didn't speak to me so much. Robert did. Robert did for sure.
Yeah.
But I liked Megan enough, and I liked her smartness, and I liked
Mm-hmm.
her curiosity, and I loved her drive,
Yeah.
that I wanted to give her some relationships in Birmingham that would elevate her and would really show her the best sides of her. In addition to her being just kind of, she's not a badass like Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
She's more badass than me because I definitely would have run in the situations I put her in. But she has tenacity. At one point, her cohorts, her newfound friends in Birmingham, are saying, "Okay, girl, it is time to go back to Detroit." And she goes like, "Oh no, they don't know who they're messing with now. I'm staying right here and figuring this out." And I love that about her.
Yeah, well, and so what did it take you to stay and figure it out in the sense of you had to do all this research yourself, right? You had to live with the, I mean, I appreciate the aha moment of the spirit of Robert has directed you to the St. Petersburg Times, but you know, you have to live with the you may never know piece. You have to live with the what does it mean to know? Once you do know, is it enough? Like, how did that research feel for you? Because you were doing it at the same time in a
Yeah.
certain way.
I felt a responsibility to it after a while.
Yeah.
My mother is still alive. She's 95 years old. She and I listened to the audiobook, some of the audiobook a few days ago.
Wow.
And once I got started on the
Mm-hmm.
path of the story, I didn't want to let her down. I thought it would be, as it was for me, a bit of a catharsis to write it. And I had written a historical fiction before, and once I get into those fictions, I always want to do justice to the people of the times, and so I just
Yeah.
felt an obligation to the characters to stay with it. Yeah, I was a little bit daunted. I always felt like in the 2019 chapters, it was a lot harder to write those chapters, harder work. The 1929 chapters felt more organic, and so that was sort of my fun
Ah,
to write
wow.
those chapters. They're short and they're pithy, and they punctuate, I think, the novel in a way that gives you kind of, at least gave me a way to use both brains. I'm a writer who doesn't always write with a lot of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
This was a departure for me. Those passages, I kind of just let myself write freely, and I
That-
don't normally do that.
That's so interesting because they are action books, you know, like the plot. And it is true that the 1929, it's very evocative. I thought as history, it was amazing in the sense of these very short chapters, the 1929, and yet you feel like you can see the cars. There's also, along with the food, there's descriptions of cars. They're great, especially for
Detroit.
those of us in our age, my age, you know, who come from the 60s car culture, like I got my first car, it's so exciting. But in the descriptions of the cars, in the descriptions of the social life, you know, in the description of the home life, like it did feel very evocative and emotional, and it was less plot driven because it was really Robert is alive, right? That was part of the message that I took from that.
That's right.
Robert has a family.
Right.
Robert goes to the community, you know, goes to the you know, local place to socialize, etc. So I had not really thought about that, about how they are really they're not just a different time, but sort of a different quality than
Right.
the plot driven.
Yes. And
Yeah.
a different pace, I think.
Yeah.
I really thought those chapters helped to paint the picture of the beginnings of our struggles with race
Yeah.
relations. You know, I mean, it's a small story in a
Yeah.
much bigger picture, but it's the Jim Crow South,
Right.
and it's a time where Black people are trying to find a way against all odds. These Jim Crow laws were draconian. Birmingham had what they call black codes. They were so onerous. I thought
Yeah.
Black people and white people could not play checkers together. That was against the law. Eight regular people, white people, had agency to pull Black people off a car that if they sat in the front of the car. It was you had to really watch your step.
Yeah.
Imagine the stress of that
Yeah.
on a day-to-day basis. And so I wanted to paint my grandfather with a lot of flaws,
Mm-hmm.
immersed in that culture and trying to find both joy and do the right thing with his family. And I think I struck the right
Oh,
chord.
absolutely.
I tell you what, I had a lot of help though from my editor who's here tonight, especially as I got deeper in the book.
Mm-hmm.
in making those contrasting chapters really flow well. You'll see a thread of storyline build in the older chapter and then pick up sort of in the 29 chapter. It was, yeah, she's great. She did a really great job with that, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think that one of the things that is can be hard today as you're trying to imagine what it's like to live with such draconian laws is that you then focus on the law and its oppression, and it's very hard to get the sense. When I feel like you struck the right note, in part it's because you also get the sense of life and joy.
Yeah.
You know, in the throwing, the grandmother up in the air as a child, like, oh, I come home, and she jumps into his arms and he throws her up in the air, and you're just like a moment of joy.
And that's one of my mother's actual memories of her father.
Wow.
And so I wanted to include every snippet of her memory of her father. She was only 2 when she got whisked away from Birmingham, Alabama. But the stories I heard from her and my grandmother and my aunt over the years, I tried to take every one of those pieces and put them into that backstory of Robert Harrington. I hope I did a good job, Grandpa.
Yeah. Well, and this, and then I'll ask one more question, and then we'll ask a wrap-up question. But you've talked a couple times about wanting to do justice to for your grandmother, for Megan's grandmother character, for history. Do you have a sense of what that means to you? Like what that responsibility, like what is it to do justice to history? My historian friends think about it a lot, and whether it's even possible to do justice to history. So what does that, how do you think about that?
I guess what I feel about it is that you put a very bright and broad spotlight on it, if you can. There are all these stories that are hidden, but a lot of them are hidden in plain sight. Yeah. And a lot of them have not been put into book form, but they reside in oral histories and stories our families carry around. I had a debate one time with a historian about whether oral histories are really histories, and I think we have to understand that for some communities, storytelling is the way we keep these memories alive. I guess, I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It does, what you're saying made me think about one time the historian Annette Gordon-Reed came to talk at my college, and someone asked her a question about what it meant that the DNA had showed that what she had showed through documents about Jefferson was actually true, and she said, well, yes, and this shows that documentary history is history, you don't need DNA, but she also said, but these stories were alive in Black people's families.
Yes.
And that for her, as an historian, that was the actual ground of history.
That's right. Yeah. And I think about that for not just Black people's families, all our families, Native American families and Asian American families. There are so many stories that have not been told about what we call progress in this country, and how we came to it and came by it, and how we got to where we are now, and how many people were screwed to get us where we are now.
Yeah. So I would appreciate it as we wrap up here, before we move on to get your questions ready, this is your warning, if you would just read the last sentence of the acknowledgments, which I thought was very moving, and which also then I think says something about what the book does, both for Cheryl having written it, but this sentence resonated for me as a reader too, in terms of what the book did for me as a reader.
Okay. I began writing this book in rage, but by the time the final words were placed on the page, I had a gratifying sense of order and love. My mother called me one day and she said, "Don't forget to tell those people that I forgive those men that killed my father." I said, "Okay, Mom." She said, "No, really, and Mama forgave them too." I said, "Okay." Yeah. I don't know if I'm there, but that she is.
Yeah. Well, and what I said to Cheryl before we came out here is, in my plans to reread the book, one of the things is I believe that as a reader that this book does bring a sense of peace, and that the next time I am enraged by various injustices, let us say, in the news, I can read this like this is it's like, oh great, I'll read Cheryl's book again, and we'll discover the truth, and then we'll feel some peace. So this is all a recommendation that you buy the book. get the book signed and then read it. But what are your questions? Please, this is our time. We're told 15 minutes, yeah, for audience
About
questions.
15 minutes?
Yeah. You have to be brave. Somebody has to be brave, yeah.
Yeah, we're great. Can you speak a little bit more about, since this is so reflective of real history for you, family history,
Yes.
why you chose fiction instead of memoir?
Yeah, I had that question the other night, and I think it comes down to just feeling as a writer I didn't have enough facts to make it memoir. I had plenty of memories and plenty of snatches of rumor and mythology from my family, but if I write a memoir, I really want it to be from what I know, and I didn't know my grandfather, so. I knew pretty quickly it needed to be fiction. When I talked to the publisher, they said, we're going to steep this in crime fiction.
Yeah.
I think that's the right decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, it also reminds me of, my colleague at Columbia, Saidiya Hartman's book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experience, which is also about, having only police records for young black women's lives and being able to tell that story in a scholarly fashion, but still the need, if your histories are not documented in the same ways, then you need to have these multiple ways. And I appreciated the detective part of it. I actually, I had not fully expected that, but it just, it really made the book move. And this is part of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay.
It added to that sense of movement, that change, right? That she's learning these things, and there's a force to the narrative that makes it go forward.
I'll tell you another thing that's kind of parallel with the book that happened for me as I'm writing it is that I got help from the chief librarian of Birmingham, Alabama. When the police department's main headquarters was being torn down, went into their basement archives and whisked away these incident cards that nobody had. And they date back to 1930, so the year after my grandfather's death. But they're index cards. They name a police officer. They name a person who has been killed. They name they call it a homicide usually, and then they have things like resisting arrest. Like 80% of them were black men. Sometimes the officer was named and sometimes not. And using these cards, he was able to work with the Northeastern University's Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project to create a narrative about all these black people, mostly men, some women, who were killed over the period of 1930 and 1970, and it's a tremendous number of them. And she has written a book about it, and it's called By Hands Now Known.
Wow. That is a great title. That's good. Other questions? I have more questions, by the way, too, so I will gladly jump in. But other questions? Yeah, in the back.
Hi.
What it was like to kind of become a detective in your own life after being a mystery writer. Whether you felt that prepared you for it or whether it was blocked.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I realized I'm supposed to say it back because we have an audience here too. So the question is, what was it like to be a detective of one's own life? So
that was it was exhilarating and also grueling when I was going through the newspapers. But I think because I'd been a reporter in Detroit, I kind of had the foundation for how to do it. I'm still being a detective because we don't know where my grandfather's buried, and I'm trying to find that out. Because I found the article, I got his actual date of death. Because I had the date of death, I was able to get for the first time his death certificate, which we've never had for 90 years. And with that death certificate, it lists a mortuary that I cannot find yet. The librarian is trying to help me find that mortuary to see whether my grandfather was buried, and if so, was he buried in Birmingham or St. Petersburg, Florida? I think I'm optimistic I can find out.
That's amazing. Yeah. All right, I'll be optimistic too. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about this when you said you had beta readers, but I'm interested that you picked a young person's voice to write in, and I was curious, like, how hard that was, and then also if you had an idea about a particular audience, were you mainly aiming for young people, or?
That's a good question.
Okay, I'm supposed to say it back again
yes,
for
I'm
our
sorry.
other viewers. So the question is, how hard was it to write in a young person's voice, and is that the audience that you had in mind?
So I tell all my writer friends when they come to me and say, I've got this story and it's got a black character, will you read it? I'm going like, you need more than one black friend. And I have friends who are of all ages, and so I called upon some of them to read the book. My kid has younger friends, so I would go to them with questions about the age of correctness on things. I think we should all do that as writers, have a broad network of people who can read our writing. Let's see, did I miss the second part of your question? It was,
Was the audience mainly young people?
I think I would love it if young people would pick up this book and read it. And I think they'll be intrigued by both Megan, and she finds a little bit of love in Birmingham. I think they'll be intrigued by that. I've kind of purposely put that in there to have some resonance with young people. I will tell you that, unlike Toni Morrison, when I write Charlie Mack, I have an older white lady in Ames, Iowa in the back of my mind as a key reader. Because I'm thinking, black people know this stuff already. I'd like this lady to know what I'm talking about.
I'm from Iowa, so
Oh, wow.
I'm your target audience. I feel very honored. Yeah, more questions? No? Okay, 1, 2, we'll go here. Okay, over here first, okay.
Okay, no, hey Cheryl.
Hey, Rob.
Just how does this is a frivolous question, as you would expect.
I would.
Your 95-year-old mother, and Megan's 92-year-old grandmother, how did they? Did you kind of think of your mother when you were writing the grandmother?
Yeah. There's actually, yes, I did very much. And when I started writing it, my mom was 92, so she's very much all over this book. When I would call her and read passages, she would sometimes say, oh, that's good. How did you think of that? I said, that's imagination. She said, oh, that's very good. Who gave you that gift? And then other times she would say, it didn't happen like that. I say, it's fiction, Mom, it's fiction.
Yeah, the imagination is good until it's not. Yeah, that's good, right here.
So yeah, you talked about the research and you talked about the incidents cards. Was
Yeah.
there did that surprise you?
Yeah, it shocked me.
And were there other moments in your research where you were just
Yeah.
found
Yes,
what
I-
you didn't expect?
So I found in researching Birmingham and police excessive force that there was a pivotal year in Birmingham's history around a case of a young woman named Benita Carter. Bull Connor was in charge of police commission in Birmingham for a long time during the civil rights period. After he left, things didn't change a lot for the police force there. And then in the 70s, this young woman was sitting in front of what they call party stores in her car, minding her own business, and police officers heard that the store was being robbed. They drive into the parking lot of the store and they proceed to shoot her dead in her car. She's just sitting there. Her name was Benita Carter. It changed policing in Birmingham. The chief of police said, we've got to retrain our officers. We've got to look at what our protocols are. If you talk to the police chief there now, who's a black person, he will say, our policing is BC, and that doesn't stand for Bull Connor. It stands for Benita Carter. So that surprised me, that they were really working to address what they knew were some of the problems they had in the police force. Those incidents cards, which when I first saw them, the librarian called them kill cards.
Wow.
So it did surprise me. It also gave me some encouragement around me taking liberties with the story about what really did happen to my grandfather the day he died. So I wrote that death scene. It was a hard one to write, you know. But there were so many of those cards that said men were resisting arrest. And I'm thinking, it's just as Jim Crow. So they probably said, why are you stopping me? Bam, bam, bam. Resisting arrest could have meant anything at that point.
Yeah, I will say, in reading, and this is part of the skill with which you evoked the scenes where, Robert is alive, is that it was very hard to read. Maybe a tear was shed as a reader because you feel it in a different way, even than when we hear about police killings on the news now, because there's all this life that's in the book. It's a death that is really felt. And one of my other questions was about your choice to present Robert as not perfect.
Right.
He has flaws, and it especially the ways in which he both is very loving and caring and has flaws. It gives you also the sense of that resisting arrest is not only a lie, but it's this sense that people are blamed for their deaths, as if small flaws, which he has, are a reason for these murders and the like. So it felt like a brave choice to have him be a flawed character.
I wanted to paint him as a really full character as I could imagine him, and I did use all the little tidbits that I had from my mom and grandmother. Haughty man, they said he was very prideful. He always had a new car. That's why that's in there. He liked to dress like a dandy. My mother would say that often.
Yeah.
I imagine him a proud man living in Jim Crow South saying to a police officer, "Why are you stopping me?" That might have been called resisting arrest at that point. Someone asked me the other day at a reading. I give my grandfather a gun. He has a gun in the story, and he seems like the kind of man who would want to fight for his material goods and to protect his family. I don't know if he owned a gun or not, but I also have in the story kind of one of Anna Cates, that's his wife's brothers, trying to avenge the pain his sister has caused. I don't know if that happened. Most of those folks in my family are dead, but I knew my uncle, and I knew he loved his sister. They had a really special relationship, and I thought if anybody would try to avenge the pain that was caused by her husband's death, it would be him. So I imagine him taking action.
Yeah, and I also thought that was another moment of the sense of community, where his choice to take action is based on knowledge that's given to him by the people around Anna Kate and Robert Lee, and where they are variously protective so that all of them can leave. And that their leaving is also a rend in the community, and yet they facilitated and allowed it to happen.
Allegedly my grandmother did not go softly into that dark night. When she found out her husband had been shot, she went down to the police station and made a fuss. And black people didn't do that in those days. They called for her brothers to come and get her because they felt that she was going to threaten the rest of the community and put them in harm's way.
Yeah, very interesting. Any final questions? I think, or we're at almost time. One more question. We're at the one more question moment. Oh, in the back, this is an actual question. I thought you were just trying to shut us down. Okay, I'll repeat it for you.
Wonderful, thank you. You said that you listened to the audiobook with your mother, and I wonder what, she had to say afterwards.
It was funny to watch her. She would sit quietly and listen, and she's almost not moving. The audiobook is really interesting. It has a male voice for the grandfather sections, and then a young female voice for the 2019 sections. And I think she was imagining, not having heard her father's voice very much. I think she was taking it in that he may have really sounded like this. I think he did a great job. He had a wonderful baritone voice. It was funny to watch her. She didn't say it didn't happen that way after we listened to it. So it was good. Thank you for the question.
The second part of the
Yeah.
question was just that, do you think in writing this that it was almost like a moment of catharsis for you and for her to almost get to know him in a different way, and how that comes through in the book?
It certainly was a catharsis for me. I mean, I really was pissed off when I started writing this book. And by the time I was finished with the book, I thought, there's probably a way for us to find a way for better policing in black communities. I really thought that was possible. For my mom, she was happy I was writing the book finally, and she was encouraging. And there were times when she would call and say, "Are you writing the book?" And I would say, "Yeah, Mom." you want to read me a little bit of it? Yes, Mom. So she was, she was encouraging all along. She would sometimes remember other things based on what I'd read to her. So she was remembering new things, which was great. So I think it's cathartic for her. She loved that her name was in the book, is my name in the book? Yes, Mom. So I think, she has some joy from that.
Well, and we, as your readers, also have some joy. So I'll just say again, thank you. Thank you for writing this book.
Thank you.
Buy the book, everybody.
Turn it off.
Alright, if we could give another round of applause for Cheryl and Janet for an amazing conversation tonight. So Cheryl's going to be signing at the back desk. My colleague over there will show you where to line up. And if you're joining us on the live stream again, we'd love to ask you to support Cheryl's work by buying a copy of Time's Undoing at the link in the description. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Good night.